Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here, and today we are ranking the albums of Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel, of course, the former frontman of legendary prog rock band Genesis, and then of course went on to great success in his solo career as well. We are ranking 9 of his studio albums today. He's got a few other sort of odd and end kind of things, several movie soundtracks and things that we're not counting, but we're doing sort of the core, I guess, core 7 plus the covers album that he did, as well as the sort of orchestrated remakes of some of his bigger hits on the album New Blood. So that brings us to 9. Who wants to kick us off, or you want to say anything about Peter Gabriel before we get started?
I've been sleeping on Peter Gabriel's solo career. My mind is blown. This is, again, sort of like a Kate Bush moment for me. I think I just didn't give him enough credit, or just kind of was fixated on So all this time. But whew, this was a pleasure. I listened to them all about 1,000 times, so I got a lot to say. So this was just great. This is very interesting. I don't know how I missed some of his solo stuff, but apparently I just like either didn't listen to it or wasn't in the right frame of mind for it. So I'm excited for this.
That kind of surprises me. I always just assumed you were well acclimated with all of this stuff. He's been one of my favorite artists for a long time. I love his voice. I love his versatility. I love kind of his musical sensibilities, especially how it pertains to pop music. And I enjoy 7 of these 9 a lot. You know, even moments where I'm not in love with some of the stuff, I always find it interesting. And I really appreciate that I can really enjoy his work and be challenged at the same time. I can't imagine him being in a room with a lot of other musicians and not being one of the smartest guys in the room. He's just a terrific artist, and, you know, he can be experimental. He can be just so many different things. And yeah, one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, I pretty much concur with that. All of his albums are really good. Always like top-notch recording and mixing, just like world-class sound on all of his records as well. Great singer, great songwriter, and like Kram said, always, at the very least, interesting.
Kick it off, Joe.
All right. Well, these albums, it's kind of a shame to include them on these listographies because I never have much good things to say about them. My number 9 is gonna be New Blood. Album like this, you definitely don't want to listen to when you're doing like an entire listen through of an artist, because they're never going to hold up to the original stuff. This is just re-recordings of some of his classics with an orchestra. You know, if I'd heard it in 2011, I probably would have thought it was pretty cool. But listening to all these in order, it's like, I've heard all these before in better format. So it's 9th. It's fine. I'm sure it's good, but it just didn't do anything for me this time in this context.
Agreed. You know, I didn't hate it because it is a bunch of really good Peter Gabriel songs. Didn't need to be done. However, I will say there are some live versions of this that are really cool. You know, I don't want to, like Joe said, we're including them. I don't want to say negative stuff, so let's just move right along.
Yeah, I don't have much else to say. It's also my number 9. Sounds fantastic. It's super well recorded. His voice sounds great, but how often am I going to go back to this one? Probably not very often.
Yeah, I mean, for an artist whose strength is originality and coming up with music that no one really sounds like, why make a repeat effort? I don't get it.
Glad we all agree on that one. Maybe I'll agree on this one. I don't know. We'll see. Scratch My Back's number 8. I really don't like Heroes or The Boy in the Bubble much as far as his cover versions. Just don't really work for me. Don't hold up at all to the originals. But I kind of like the lesser known songs. His cover of Mirrorball and Flume by Elbow and Bonnie there. The Power of the Heart by Lou Reed cover. I think his cover of My Body's a Cage by Arcade Fire is pretty cool. And I like the artists he picked to do kind of the covers of. I think they're interesting. I think he does a pretty good job. The Street Spirit cover is pretty cool. But, you know, it's a cover album. It's probably not going to hold up to his original stuff. So it's my number 8. I thought it was fine. But again, it's just a covers album. It doesn't really belong kind of, you know, when you're listening through his whole discography.
Yep, broken record. If your strength is being original, why do stuff that's been done before? I kind of like Heroes. Don't agree with My Body is a Cage. Book of Love is kind of cool. I'd say none of the songs are better than the original. So even though he's a master of texture and, you know, sonic capabilities, doesn't really need to be made. Interesting enough, but my number 8 as well.
Actually, not my number 8, but I'm not doing anything crazy. It's not going to be in the top 5 or anything. It's coming soon, but my number 8 is actually going to be Us. This is his only kind of like normal studio album that I don't really like that much. It feels like it's trying too hard to repeat the success of So. It feels labored over, now coming 6 years after the fact. It feels a little out of step with the time. It's his only record that kind of falls into a little bit of an adult contemporary area where there's like some pan flutes and stuff on it that I don't like a lot. I don't think the songwriting's as good as it usually is on his records, so not a big fan of this one. Gonna be number 8.
Krams was making funny gestures. Hard disagree, but that's all right. My number 7 is going to be Up. I didn't love it. It's fine. You know, interesting textures, and you know, it's very interesting, but I just don't want to listen to it that much. It doesn't have really any of the pop sort of sensibilities that he was, you know, cultivated on So and Us, and it's kind of bored me a little bit. You know, this is what, 2002, so it's 10 years after Us. It's another one that he kind of spent a really long time making. He started in 95, so I don't know. You know, it's tough judging these albums when the artists get older and sort of, they just, I don't know, they never for me kind of have that same magic and that same touch. So it's a fine recording, but it just didn't grip me. It doesn't do anything for me, really.
Joe and I are in sync so far. I've got Up at number 7. However, it sounds like I liked it a lot more than Joe did. Like I said, 7 of these. This one is, you know, at least a B+ for me. I like it a good bit. It's definitely different than pretty much all the other stuff. Maybe a little bit of the vibes that Security has, because it's a really, you know, dense, dark, kind of morose record where it's more about the feeling, and you know, you really got to put effort into it here to get into it, and maybe it's not quite worth the, you know, the patience and the resolve you need to get through it, but I do think it communicates better than Joe's Leading On. My biggest thing is that it's just a little too much of a, you know, a soundboard studio album and not enough of him really letting his voice go. And maybe that's because he was older, but, you know, just a little bit too much missing of the things that I love Peter Gabriel. That said, I love Darkness. I love Growing Up. I like the Barry Williams Show a good bit, and I really like The Drop. There's a lot of really good stuff on it, but it just doesn't measure up to my other favorite Peter Gabriel stuff. But still a thumbs up and a recommendation for Up.
All right, my number 7 is going to be Scratch My Back. You guys aren't totally off base on this one. I do like the song selections. I think some of the orchestral arrangements are really, really nice. His vocals sound great, but like Cram said, probably not any of them better than the originals. I don't know. I had this on CD when it first came out, and I listened to it a good bit, so maybe that is maybe what's pushing it ahead of Us for me. I just sort of have a little more attachment to it than I have to Us, but probably a non-essential listen for people trying to get into Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, and if I can add, there's a couple of songs where I think he just kind of completely misses the mark of the original song, like Street Spirit is just like, what was the point of this? The Regina Spektor song, like just none of it really just captures anything about the original recording. So,
well, this is probably my most controversial pick. So get ready for this. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Now, my number 6, and I like this one enough. I think from here on up, it only gets better. I think they're all good. But this one just kind of didn't grab me, and maybe it's because of where it falls in his discography. But I have number 4 here, aka Security. I don't know, after 3, and 3 is so kind of gripping with sounds that people have really never heard before, what he did to sort of usher in the sounds of the 80s with the synths and the Fairlight CMI and sort of the atmosphere and textures that he created. This one, which he mostly self-produced, and maybe that's the problem, just doesn't have the same, interest for me. I really like Shock the Monkey. I think it's a really cool single, but nothing else really holds up, I think, in comparison to anything on 3. And I think that sort of juxtaposition is kind of what hurts it for me. I still think it's very good, and I like all the playing. Maybe it's just because it's missing a little bit of that guitar work from Robert Fripp. I friggin' fell in love with Robert Fripp's guitar work on the first 3. So the fact that he's not really here on this definitely hurts it. Not quite as poppy as the other 3. So the hooks just aren't quite there. So I don't know. Maybe I just didn't give it enough listens, but it's just didn't hold up for me. I listened to the other ones so many times, like kind of kept skipping this or just sort of breezing over it on my listen through. So maybe it's one of those growers on you, but just didn't grab my interest sort of immediately like the other ones did.
I can see that. It's probably, his more like experimental art album, his Kid A, if you will. And like you said, coming after Melt, maybe not what people wanted or expected. So the way my 9 worked is, 9, 8, 7 locked, 3, 2, 1 locked. 4, 5, and 6 are kind of a jumble for me. And my number 6 is going to be the debut, Car 1. Peter Gabriel, whatever you want to, how many names does an album need, for God's sake? It's a really good album. I think the first 2 albums are, you can kind of hear the Genesis influences a little bit more. There's a little bit more prog rock. It's, I don't want to say heavier, but there's a little bit more kind of just traditional guitar and drum kind of, interludes and, accompaniment. But, there's a lot of really good stuff on this. I just don't think it has quite the high moments that some of the other albums do. That said, Slow Burn, Modern Love, Solsbury Hill are all fantastic. Here Comes the Flood is a really cool closer. I guess the thing that doesn't really grip me like the other ones do is because it's just a little bit too close to Genesis, hasn't really become his full artistic vision yet. He's not flexing his own muscles the way he will later. But I do think it's a really good album. Good call on Fripp kind of being the star of the show for the first few albums, because after that, as far as the musicianship, I think the percussion and the drums and the later Peter Gabriel albums are unsung heroes of the music world. So, which I talked a little bit about in the 1986 Album of the Year video. But yeah, this was a tough call. Like I said, 6, 5, and 4 are going to be pretty close to one another, but I'm going with the debut, Peter Gabriel 1.
All right. Number 6 for me, I'm going with Up. This is another record that I had when it came out and I listened to all the time and I loved it. Upon revisiting this time through, didn't really age as well as I expected it to have. Songs that I used to love, like growing up, didn't really sound that great to me. Some of the production is a little weird on it, a little dated sounding. But having said that, some of the highlights on this record are still really great. Darkness is fantastic. I really like I Grieve a lot. So this has its moments of being really good, but probably, has sort of that early 2000s production that we've talked about numerous times on this channel that just it's not the greatest, but it's got its moments for sure.
I remember listening to that in your car a decent bit, and I think a good call. It doesn't age well, because I remember us being like, wow, this sounds really cool, and now it's kind of like, yeah. It's probably his worst sounding record.
Number 5 for me, I got Us. Disagree with Jason. I think it's a very good album. Yeah, it kind of has some of the same feel as So. Steam is kind of like Sledgehammer Part 2. But something like Digging in the Dirt, I think very moody, kind of cool. It's early 90s. It's 92. Kind of sounds like the intro to The Sopranos, the Got a Gun. It kind of has that drive to it. It's kind of cool. But I think, Come Talk to Me, which is about kind of splitting with his daughter, kind of as she drifts away, is a cool song. I think the songwriting is really good. It's mature, but I don't think it's adult contemporary at all. And the songs are longer. They're a little less immediate than So, but I think for the most part, he's 42 or so on this album. So it's going to be a little more adult, a little more mature, but I think it kind of straddles the gap, the divide between that sort of growing up and growing old and still maintaining the nice pop dynamics that he's kind of always known and been good at. Lots of still kind of, still that world influence on it, but I don't think it sounds too dated or anything. And I think it's a very strong effort. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I didn't think it would hold up. And I know I've listened to it before, but this is not one that I've revisited that much. But I think it's a solid album for Peter Gabriel.
This one is going to be tough for me. My number 5 is an album I really like, and it just plays, I react differently to it every time I listen to it. And I think right now, and this list could be different 6 months from now, but right now where I'm at, I'm blown away by one record that I haven't named yet, which kind of caught me off guard. And this one I probably liked a lot more 5 or 6 years ago, and it just kind of like hasn't aged quite as much, although I still really like it. And that's going to be Security, which I think is awesome. So that's going to be my number 5. I don't have anything really to complain about it. It's just a really cool, like, artistic, dense pop record. It's not a pop record, but it's got some traditional aspects to it. Shock the Monkey being like the pop version, or I Have the Touch a little bit. I don't know what it is where it just doesn't quite capture me the way it used to. I just think it's maybe a little bit too odd, and to be honest, I think it might be just a little bit too creepy at times. Like, I think just kind of is a little bit unsettling, where I don't know if it's supposed to be that unsettling. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't quite do it for me as much as it used to, but I still really like it. So this is tough. I don't really know how, other than the fact that what I'm going to have at number 4 blew me away more than it ever has. So that's all I can really say. I still think it's great. And I love pretty much all of these albums. So Security at number 5.
My number 5 is going to be Peter Gabriel 2, aka Scratch. I think this is a more cohesive record than the debut, but the debut has a lot of standout moments for me, and this has almost none. So while it's maybe like a more complete vision from Peter Gabriel, I mean, I've heard this album dozens of times, and if you asked me to hum the melody to any of these songs, I don't think I could do it. Just nothing from this record really stands out, but it's still an enjoyable listen when you put it on. I think the production's pretty cool. Just for whatever reason, none of the songs from this record ever stick with me.
Interesting. We are going to have very different lists, and I like that. It gets really tough at 4. It's almost impossible for me to rank these. So it kind of comes down to production mostly, because I think the songwriting on 1, 2, 3, and So is all just phenomenal. I think really it's about sort of the sounds and what he's going for. So this is tough, but I gotta put 3 at 4. This one is just a little too 80s sounding. It's a little too synth and Fairlight, CMI heavy. This is Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham as the producers, along with Peter Gabriel. Definitely kind of has that 80s sound, a little more experimental. It's not really the big synth heaviness of So. I just kind of like the songs on So a little bit more. And these are all great songs. Intruder's awesome, very creepy. One of the creepiest songs maybe ever written, at least on a big pop name. No Self-Control is great. I really like Kate Bush's backup vocals, obviously, on that, and Games Without Frontiers. I don't remember I love Tony Levin's work with uses a Chapman stick on it, and the bass sound is just ridiculous. It's very cool. It's like an evil version of Graceland. It's just all over the place. One of the best bass performances of all time. So I gotta love that one. But something like In Through the Wire, like he kind of already did that a bit on 1 and 2, I think, in better showcases for that kind of more straightforward rock style. Games Without Frontiers, I don't really like Biko. And I don't really, the second half, Games Without Frontiers, Not One of Us, Lead a Normal Life, and Biko, I just don't love. I think that's what held it back for me. And again, not as much Robert Fripp, so that, I think I'm just obsessed with Robert Fripp mostly. I don't even know why I'm doing Peter Gabriel lists. This is a phenomenal album, don't get me wrong. I love it, it's great. I'll listen to it again. It just didn't quite grip me the way the other ones did, so controversial, I know, but I got Melt at number 4.
Very controversial. Jason's album of the year, and it was a runner-up for me. It was really close between that and The River for 1980. But so my number 4, speaking of Robert Fripp, is going to be the album that I think he is the best on, and that's going to be Scratch, or Peter Gabriel 2. I agree with Jason that number 1 probably has some more standout, well-known songs, but like he said, this one is more cohesive, and I just honestly enjoy it start to finish more. And this is the one that kind of surprised me, because going into it and probably how I would have done it maybe a year ago, I would have had Security and One probably before this. But for some reason, it just has like this just glue to it where, you know, it's everything about it just works for me. It just doesn't have those standouts. If it had some standout tracks on it, it would probably be top 3 or maybe 1 or 2, because I think it sounds amazing. I think the playing on this, the playing is, you know, the songs are kind of written for the playing, which I don't think really happens in much of the other albums, but this one it does. And, you know, the other little problem I have with it is the second half isn't as good as the first half, but On the Air, DIY, Mother of Violence is a great first 3 tracks to start it off. White Shadow is really cool. You know, it's got a little bit of funk, it's got a little bit of prog, it's got a little bit of rock. It's just got, it's like their album or his album that they did the best as a band. And then, you know, kind of just went a different direction and got a little bit or much more artistic and experimental. But this one really works for me. Still got a little bit of that Genesis vibe that, you know, the first one does. But yeah, I listened to this more than all the other ones. You know, I know most of them by heart, but this one I just kind of had on a lot in the background throughout the last few days and just really like it. And I was surprised by it and pleasantly surprised. So Scratch, or number 2, Peter Gabriel 2 is my number 4.
All right. My number 4 is going to be Peter Gabriel 1, Car. I agree with a lot of what Cram said about it. Not a really cohesive record. There's some, like, part of this record sounds like Genesis. Some of it sounds like stuff he would do on future solo albums. Some of it sounds unlike anything he did before or since, like Solsbury Hill, Excuse Me. I mean, there aren't really any other songs in his catalog like those tracks. So it doesn't really play out as a record that well, but there are a lot of songs on it that I really like a lot. Here Comes the Flood is great. I like the aforementioned Solsbury Hill and Excuse Me. Slow Burn's cool. I like the opener, Moribund the Burgermeister. So it's got a lot of great songs, but not the greatest album. I think he's got 3 that are better.
Well, I don't. This is another controversial one, and I'm sorry, but this one took the biggest hit, and Cramser knows what I'm going to say. It's So. So is my number 3, and it's just a great album. It's so good. Pretty much all the way across. Red Rain, Sledgehammer, Don't Give Up, Kate Bush duet. I mean, can't go wrong with that. In Your Eyes, one of the greatest ballads of all time. Big Time. Awesome 80s rocker. It's almost perfect, except it's in the 80s and has that 80s sound. And listening to Gabriel, you know, in his discography from front to back really kind of changed the way I feel about everything in my entire life, much less the 80s. And it just didn't, maybe it's over familiarity with this one, because this is obviously the one I've listened to the most in my life. And maybe in a couple years, it'll rise back up to the top where I assumed it would be. I think we all assumed I'd have it at the top. It was a very close runner-up in 1986 to Queen is Dead. But I don't know, it's that 80s sound that I just don't love anymore. And it hurts it for me. And it's a phenomenal album. The playing is awesome. You know, the drums, the bass, Stuart Copeland, Tony Levin. It's a bajillion different guest instrumentalists and vocalists, all doing different things. It all sounds great. The songs are probably his best, most focused ones that he'd ever do. But it just, I don't know, it doesn't grip me because of the 80s sound anymore. I don't know. Doing these lists, just my love for 70s and 70s production in particular is sort of just overwhelmed everything. And something like this and Melt don't quite hit me like his 70s stuff. So I got it. His only two 70s albums as my top two. So that probably tells you a lot about me and how I view the music world now.
Well, look, first of all, I'm really happy that you love Peter Gabriel, and I know you still like So a good bit, but you really put your foot in your mouth by saying the production is going to decide the rest of your order, and then one of maybe the 5 best produced records of all time, you got a number 3.
No, I mean, this is a 10. This is probably a 10 for me, 10 out of 10. So I'm basically, you know, it sounds like I'm knocking the album, but I'm literally giving the only possible argument against it that anyone could make, because there's really nothing else you could say about it other than stylistically it's not your favorite. I mean, that's literally the only thing I can knock it down a peg with at this point.
And you're like newly in love with these discovered first few Peter Gabriel albums. I get it. That said, I also have So at number no, I'm kidding. I don't have it at number 3. What I do have at number 3 is an album that Jason said kind of sounds like So, but I don't really buy it. Maybe a little bit, just because that's how progress generally works for artists, as albums kind of sound a little bit like the one before. I've got Us. Really love it. Always have. Could be a contender for 92, which is a loaded year for albums of the year. We'll see. This one, to me, I kind of understand what Jason's saying with like the adult contemporary vibe. I understand what he's trying to say. I just don't agree that that's the right term for it. But it is kind of like this masterpiece of world music. You know, you've got bagpipes, organs, pan flutes, African beats, all of this stuff. I think it works really good as a cohesive unit. Like I said, it's got like that big global sound to it, but a lot of the songs and the lyrics are really personal, which I really like. It was about his breakup, I believe, at the time. The one song that doesn't belong on here is Steam for me, which Joe aptly named kind of the stepsister of Sledgehammer, and just not as good. But I like the 2 tracks with Sinead O'Connor, Blood of Eden, Come Talk to Me. I really like Love to Be Loved. Secret World is an amazing closer, and there's some tragically underrated live versions of that song on most of his live stuff, which are awesome. Digging in the Dirt is great. Yeah, I like this album a good bit. It's just a really cool, interesting pop record for me, and I think Jason is wrong.
My number 3 is So.
All right. Okay.
We killed him.
This at one point would have definitely been my number 1. I think going through the albums of the year is when it started to kind of slip in my mind a little bit. I don't think it's because of the production. I think the production, like Cram said, is immaculate, so well recorded, so well mixed. It's one of the best sounding records ever. But the songwriting to me just isn't as interesting as it is on the 2 that I have ahead of it. I think the writing on the other 2 records is a lot cooler, a lot more adventurous, a little more daring. I don't know, some of this record's a little safe for me, and there may be an overplay factor, at play as well. But number 3 for me, So.
So let me be clear, not the production like skill level itself. It's the sound of the 80s is why So drop down a little bit. Speaking of production, this is why the first 2 kind of rose to the top. My choice for number 2 is going to be Scratch, and this was produced by Robert Fripp, so it's super Robert Frippy, just all over the place. His guitar work, that reading through here, they have a word to describe his guitar style. It's like Fripponomics or something.
Frippertronics.
Yeah, Frippertronics. That sort of like jazzy, like single note, just really cool and really kind of caught me off guard when I was listening through all of these, especially on a song like On the Air, which Jason said he had trouble like thinking of songs on here. I think every one of these is pretty much immaculate and catchy. On the Air and DIY, White Shadow, some awesome guitar work, awesome. Again, Tony Levin on all these, he's the MVP almost, because his bass work is just untouchable. And I think Fripp brings in, there's some like steel guitar and mandolin and some more interesting kind of instrumentation that doesn't rely on sampling and synths nearly as much. There's organs and saxophones and sort of those real instruments. And I think for me, that's sort of what just elevates it a little bit above the other ones. I really like, I love the 70s sound. This is 78, which means we got to go back and redo 78 because I got a whole bunch of new stuff to throw on there. It's just, I don't know. This was close with me for the top spot, and I went back and forth. And I think the first one's just a little cooler and more interesting. This one's definitely a little more cohesive, and I think it's because it was produced by Robert Fripp in general. But, I think Peter Gabriel's vocals are awesome. He goes from sort of like a pop sensibility to sort of like almost screaming, not screaming, but like, I don't know how to even describe it. I guess it's not what I expected from Peter Gabriel as far as singing, his versatility. So I don't know, there's something about this and the first one that just have gripped me ever since we started listening to these. So I don't know, it's a surprise to me. I'm sure it's a surprise to everyone, to you. But yeah, Scratch is my number 2, and I really love it. And if we redid 1978, it might win. It'd be toe-to-toe if Van Halen won.
Yeah, Scratch, like you, kind of blew me away. I know I've heard it before, but I think what's going on right now is that you guys are just a product of our listography environment where we've been doing album of the year for the 80s right now, and Joe's not happy, and you guys are just missing the 70s. And you're not thinking clearly, but it is what it is. Yeah, I'm going to be all right. And I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit. My number 2 is a really strong number 2. Alluded to it earlier. It's got to be Melt, obviously, if you've been watching this video or our channel, or 86. So it's going to be my number 1. But Melt is awesome. I think I had kind of undersold it a little bit when I was talking about it in the 1980 video about it being the runner-up to The River. It's a really fantastic album, and also grew on me a good bit, and will be probably very prominent in my favorite albums of all time list whenever we get to that. You guys have already, or Joe already touched on it. I don't think Jason's going to talk about it until the very end, but everything about it is awesome. Intruder is so moody and creepy and disturbing, and I Don't Remember is just awesome. Family Snapshot, I like And Through the Wire a good bit. The only song on it that doesn't really do it as much as the other ones is probably, Start is just like a little piece, but maybe Not One of Us doesn't live up to the other 9 songs or whatever, but I still like it a good bit. As much as I love So, if he never made So and this was my runaway number 1 winner, it probably wouldn't affect where I have Peter Gabriel all time on my list. That's how much I like most of these albums. So a really strong number 2, Melt, Peter Gabriel 3.
All right, my number 2 is going to be Peter Gabriel 4, aka Security. I don't know, this one's been growing on me as a result of going back when we did 82. It was a runner-up, and now after doing albums of the year and coming back to it for the listography, I liked it more and more each time I revisited it. I don't think it has as many sort of like killer moments or like songs that would make my top 10 Peter Gabriel songs, which, spoiler alert, is pretty loaded with songs from my winner. But I think it works really well. Very cohesive record. I like every track on it. I don't think it really has any weak spots. San Jacinto is great. I Have the Touch is awesome. Shock the Monkey. Just overall, really strong record. I like it a lot, and it's one that I think is continuing to grow on me the more I listen to it. So yeah, like I'm sure all of us, strong number 2, strong number 3 and 4 really also. So a very strong discography.
Yeah, I got a strong 5 and 6 situation too. But you're right. Even though I've listened to these for years, they still all grow on me, including So, which is like the big, well-known, overplayed one. Everything is just always better over time.
Well, we got a situation where 3 different albums. Does that happen often? I don't think it happens too often. Usually one of us will agree on one, but
I think it famously happened with The Who, where I don't think anyone saw that coming.
Well, my number 1, Peter Gabriel won. Totally slept on this one because it is just phenomenal. It's 9 tracks that are almost all completely different. There's almost no coherence to this album. It doesn't bother me at all. These are 9 songs that basically Peter Gabriel was just, I don't know, saving or just so happy to be free of Genesis that he just came up with these 9. And every one, Morbin the Burgermeister, classic kind of Genesis sound. Solsbury Hill, completely different than anything he'd ever done. The way it fits on this album is kind of bizarre, but it's a great song. Modern Love, which is, almost Bowie-esque, which is ironic because Bowie's Modern Love would come later, but, Excuse Me sounds like Randy Newman mixed with Bob Dylan almost. Slow Burn's got this ridiculously awesome guitar in it. There's this cool orchestration in Here Comes the Flood. Down the Dolce Vita's great. This is Bob Ezrin producing, lots of Robert Fripp and Tony Levin. They're playing, as always, is immaculate. Some really cool moments from both of them. Peter Gabriel's voice, I didn't realize he was this versatile. The way he kind of changes his voice and his songwriting style, just, from soft to ferocious to, totally rock and kind of pop forward, just amazing. And I don't know, 1977 is a tough year, but so many good albums, but this kind of blew me away. And as far as why it's number 1, I went back and, sort of made my list of songs for the top 10 songs, and this one kind of ran away with the most entries on it. So just love everything about it. There's not a single weak moment for me. So that's why it's my number 1. Car by Peter Gabriel. Who knew? Who knew?
Didn't see that coming, but I am happy for you nonetheless. My number 1's going to be So. Duh. It's maybe just can count the albums on my hand that I like more than this of all time. Not a bad song on it. I grew up, but, more accustomed to the 02 remaster edition that has This Is the Picture on it and In Your Eyes is the closer. But, with the original track listing is awesome too. In Your Eyes openings, side 2. This album just sounds so amazing. The percussion on it is ridiculous. The vision is tremendous. Got the feels for it all over the place. It can be really dark and gloomy with like Mercy Street and Don't Give Up, and really romantic at times, really just cool kind of cynical plastic pop at times. I don't know what else to say. I say more in 86. It's one of my favorite albums ever. Pet Sound sounds better. Might be the only album I'd concede is a better piece of studio work than this one. It's one of my favorites, and a low-key, simple, great album cover.
Yeah, I'll give it that. My number 1 is Melt, Peter Gabriel 3. For me, this is where everything just kind of comes together for his solo career. Great art rock tunes. They're catchy. They're memorable. They can all stand on their own as great singles, but they work together really well as an album. I just think it's pretty much a perfect record. I love the sound of it, sort of the invention of gated reverb on this record on the drums. Not really any cymbals or hi-hat. We discussed that in the Album of the Year video, which makes it kind of interesting. Percussion-wise, you've got some, it forces the drummer into some different areas. The tom work's really cool and unique on this record. I love Intruder, No Self-Control, I Don't Remember, Games Without Frontiers, Biko. I don't know. It's just a stacked record. I think it's fantastic. More and more, it's becoming a clear favorite for me. So I'm going with Melt. number one for Peter Gabriel. All right, that'll be interesting to see how do the math and average it out. I think aside from the ones at the bottom, I think it's going to be pretty neck and neck for the top 5 or so. But yeah, any final closing thoughts before we get into our songs list?
Here's the big question, and I've been thinking about this one a lot after listening to this. Peter Gabriel with Genesis, Phil Collins with Genesis, Peter Gabriel solo, or Phil Collins solo. How do you rank those now? Because it's changed for me completely.
Gabriel solo is my number one by a mile. And I was going to say, even though I've always loved him, this is the first time I've listened to everything straight through, which is what's great about doing these listographies, is really put you in focus. And he's probably in my top 25 artists now. He was probably around 40, 50. Now it's like, for sure, I can't name that many people better.
I would agree. Peter Gabriel solo, I would put over any Genesis.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been a Genesis with Phil Collins as my number one, but now I gotta say, I think Peter Gabriel may have snuck past him. So it's probably Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins with Genesis, and then I don't know. I don't want to say Phil Collins solo because people will yell at me, but
I will yell.
Leave that to the imagination.
I'll go Gabriel solo, barely Phil with Genesis, just because, well, watch the Genesis video and get ready to be pissed at me and Jason. And then Peter with Genesis, and then Phil Collins solo can go the rest of my life. Not really.
I would put Peter Gabriel Genesis ahead of Phil Collins Genesis, even though my favorite Genesis record is a Phil Collins led record. But I think, I'm trying to remember my order, I think my 2 and 3 were both Peter Gabriel albums.
No, you had Phil in, I think, 2 of your 3.
I don't think so. I think I had Lamb on number 2 and Selling England at number 3.
No, I thought you had Duke and Abbott in the top 3. Maybe I'm wrong.
Whatever. That's the order I would put them in. But anyways, let us know your ranking of the Peter Gabriel catalog down in the comments below. If you want to play along and rank the 4 iterations of Genesis and their solo careers as well, you can do that. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already to the channel yet, hit the bell for notifications, and check the description for links to all of our social media accounts and follow those. We put some random stuff up on those, and we'll be letting you know in advance on those platforms what artist is going to be coming the following week. Keep an eye out tomorrow for our 10 favorite Peter Gabriel songs. We'll see you then.